and welcome to the Ark at Headingley. For this week's edition of Backchat, we're joined by three gentlemen who represent the round, shiny devices we use to open the doors to rugby league knowledge. They are Danny Lockwood from League Weekly newspaper, Peter Smith from the Yorkshire Evening Post, and Martyn Sadler from League Express. Let's get straight into it. One of the big stories of the week on the field, lots of stories off the field, but one of the big stories on the field this week, Danny, start with you. Oldham's win at Hull Kingston Rovers. Is that the biggest Challenge Cup shock of all time?
I think it's pretty unequivocal, Dave. I think I can't, certainly in my memory banks, back in the days when we did have legitimate shocks, we thought that age of the Challenge Cup had gone with full-time professionalism. Oldham languishing, I guess you'd say, 9th place in the championship with only 3 wins, and they go and knock over, okay, Super League strugglers, but that was by no means a half a Hull KR team. They had enough guys, enough talent, enough quality on that field to beat anybody in the championship, especially at home. And I think it was an absolute earthquake of a result.
Yeah, on the back. And it was convincing, wasn't it? Because they were winning easily at half time, and they held off a Hull KR revival in the second half without that much difficulty, it has to be said. So, absolutely tremendous result for Oldham, and great for Chris Hamilton, the chairman of Oldham, who rescued the club back in 1997, 1998. He's had a hard slog over those years. They've never really had a stadium, to call their own, and they've been moving around and around. They're now at Bowerfold in Staley Bridge. They've actually not had a bad start to the season recently. The last few games, they've really made some progress.
They beat Backley recently. They've only got 3 wins, but they beat Backley recently.
Absolutely, yeah. So it's great. I'm so pleased for the Oldham fans, actually, because they've got a really faithful bunch at Oldham. It's a real rugby league town, as we obviously know, and I just think it's marvellous to see them doing well at last.
Can you see a bigger shot? Have you seen a bigger shot?
Hunslet beat Huddersfield, I think, 2003, which was when Huddersfield had come through, newly promoted to Super League, and they'd come through the entire season unbeaten in the lower division. So that was a big shock, but that was at Hunslet. The fact that this was at Hull KR, I think that just adds to it. But it shouldn't happen, should it? Full-time professionals shouldn't be losing.
No.
To these part-time
you would look at the 2
players.
or 3 full-time teams at the top end of the championship and expect them to go for an hour maybe with a Super League team, Dave. But the fact is, Oldham are legitimate part-timers. And the fact that they were so far ahead at half-time, you would have expected James Webster to absolutely fire a rocket up those OKR guys and tell them... I know Neil Hudgell, the chairman's come out now and said he's going to smoke out the imposters, whatever that means. But the fact is, there should have been careers on the line at half-time of that game, and we should have seen an absolute revolution in the attitude of OKR afterwards. And basically we didn't.
I'll tell you what's quite interesting about it as well. A lot of people were saying until last weekend that the qualifiers this year, later in the year, when we get to the Triple Eight system, the Super League clubs are looking a lot stronger than whoever their likely challengers are going to be from the Championship. A lot of people were saying, well, it's going to be a bit of an anticlimax, this middle 8. But actually, I think Oldham have fired that up now and shown that Championship sides can beat Super League sides, and I think the RFL should be very grateful for that, to be honest.
They can do it as a one-off. Remember last year that
Bradford beat Salford, didn't they, in a one-off?
Last year Lee beat Wakefield and Salford in the Challenge Cup. But then look what happened happened in the middle 8s. They flopped very badly, so I wouldn't read too much into it. But I mean, it's the flip side of it. It's a great result for Oldham, but it's an absolute catastrophic result for Hull KR, isn't it? Remember the team that got to Wembley last year, and that finished badly enough for them, the 50-0. But from their point of view, to lose to a semi-professional team, where do you go from?
Well, they're now looking by far the weakest side in Super League, aren't they? Given the way that Wakefield are playing.
2 weeks ago, Martin, they went to Leeds and they won. They didn't just beat Leeds. They were convincingly 30 points to 10, I think it was, and they were by far the better team.
So they might bounce back themselves.
How do you explain that?
Well, it's been a year. It's been a year like that.
It's been a year where you cannot. I mean, Warrington looks as though they might go through the rest of the season unbeaten, and then Sandow's injured, and suddenly they lose 2 on the run for it.
And the wheels drop off. And I'm still with the cup. I don't think we should mention also Lee, who really think that they belong in Super League, going down at League One to lose.
You see, for me, before the weekend began, that for me was the tie of the round, because it was a real chance to see where Toulouse are at.
Indeed.
It's one thing winning all 3 matches so far in League One, only conceding 6 points, but it was a real test against Lille. So what does that tell us about the French side's ambitions?
Well, the interesting thing about the French side was they had 14 French players, 14 players who qualified to play for France. I think their average age was 24.
Yeah.
And that's a hell of a good sign, isn't it?
Well, it's everything that the Catalan Dragons, who are flying high in Super League, aren't.
Yeah.
But I do think it's a tremendously encouraging sign, and I don't think there's any doubt at all that Toulouse will be in the Championship next year, and they will be shaking that competition.
I think they're playing at Rochdale this weekend, aren't they, Toulouse? And that's going to be probably the first real test for them.
They're in the wrong division, aren't they? If they were an amateur team in the Pennine League or something, they'd have been bumped up midway through the season because they're playing below their standard.
Yeah.
But maybe that's not such a
I was going to say, is that a bad thing?
To the English game for a season, and then they can come into the Championship next year, which we all think that they will.
Yeah. Well, they've got 2,100 people there, which isn't a bad Challenge Cup crowd at that level, and you know, let's hope they can build on it, and if they do get promoted, come up stronger.
I know we did reference the middle eights there, Dave, and I do think that whereas last year Lee and Bradford looked head and shoulders above their contemporaries in that competition, I think this year no one's really poking the nose over the top and saying that they look like competing. We hoped that the experience of last year would give us another cracking £1 million game at the end of the season. Right now you're struggling to see who's got the either the levels of performance or the consistency to challenge later on. And Lee particularly, who have spent all that money.
Yeah. On the other side of that, you could have two very good Super League teams in the middle eight as well. I mean, if Leeds and Huddersfield finish in the bottom 4, and there's every chance of that happening, it's going to make it even more difficult, isn't it?
Just the last word on the Challenge Cup. Toulouse were semi-finalists, of course. Let's not forget that.
2005.
Against Leeds, and were holding their own against Leeds at half-time in that match, weren't they? And obviously went on to lose heavily. And a word for Scott Naylor as well, because I think that's one of the things that's gone under the headlights. You know, he's developing a bit of a reputation. He was in the Salford side that beat Wigan back in '96, the first ever team to beat Wigan in the Challenge Cup for 7 or 8 years.
Well, Scott Naylor, if you're talking about potential future coaches in Super League, he now looks like somebody who might fall into that category, doesn't he?
Yeah.
If you're looking to replace somebody who's not done so well, Scott Naylor's a guy you'd look at, in my view.
Yeah. It's a good news story all
of course
round.
it is.
For the sport, it's a good news story for everybody that isn't from East Hull.
Yeah, and a great news story as far as Huddersfield and Leeds are concerned this last week with their 2 wins, especially if Huddersfield had lost against Warrington, which everyone expected them to do, they'd have been cut adrift at the bottom. How much does that tell us? Well, Leeds, we'll start with Leeds. Is that a turnaround? Because that looked like, even if they'd lost against Hull, that looked like their best performance of the year so far.
It was an improved performance, yes. I don't think you should get too carried away. Conditions were very poor. Hull were missing some key players, as obviously Leeds are. I thought Jamie Shaw was a big miss for them at full-back. But Leeds looked a lot more confident to me. They came out, they seemed to be just jumping a little bit more. The team were buzzing a little bit more. It was a game that they might have lost earlier in the season when they went behind early in the second half. But yeah, it was a step forward. Brian McDermott in his post-match press conference was more down on the team, really, saying it's not great, it's not a turning point, we need to build on it. I think the big test will come at Saints on Friday. But Leeds have the tools, even with the players missing. Leeds have the tools to climb the table, and it might be just what they need, confidence-wise.
Yeah, I thought the interesting thing about Leeds was that when they had that game at Salford the previous week, on the stats, they actually won the game on everything but the scoreboard. You know, if you look at the stats for the game, they had far more metres than Salford. Everything, they were more effective tacklers and so on, but they just didn't win on the scoreboard. So you could see things falling back into place. They just couldn't finish and score tries. And I think, they've taken one step further on last Friday night.
They really needed that. They really needed that. And you can't beat confidence in the camp, and they've built a little bit of that up. I thought it was a game that Hull possibly lost as much as Leeds won it. I know you mentioned missing Jamie Shaw, but I thought Curtis Norton had an absolutely cracking game standing in for him at full-back. And I think that Hull, Lee Ratford won't be too down about that outcome.
No.
Relief all round at Leeds, but they are still a long way off being a top 8, a legitimate top 8 club.
I think Hull are still only 2 points off top spots, aren't they? I think there's 3 teams on level on points, and Hull are just 2 points behind them. But I mean, that game, Leeds against St Helens, because St Helens are going into it with no confidence whatsoever after their defeat by, not just their defeat, a mauling by Catalan last week.
Yeah, but that was a mauling by the form team in the competition, and that was as accomplished in 80 minutes, Dave, as I've seen from anybody this year. And I think you look at the quality across that Catalan Dragon team, and I find it at the moment difficult to see who's going to stop them.
The fascinating thing about the Catalans, though, Danny, is that a few weeks ago they played Hull at home and lost 10 points to 38.
Yeah, that was the second match of the season.
And I remember thinking then, God, you know, where's this team going? You know, they looked they were absolutely outplayed by Hull.
But they were still meeting each other. They were fresh off the plane.
We underestimated how important that was, is what I was going to say. You know, and this six-game winning run is absolutely tremendous from their point of view.
5 away, I mean, significantly 5 away on the trot.
Well, that was what they could never do, wasn't it? That was their hoodoo, was winning away from home.
I think the RFL has now got to start planning how to sell the grand final with, you know, put some tickets on sale in France.
Because they're not going to bring many over, are they?
You
It'd be good for the game,
so.
wouldn't it? It'd be good for the profile of the game if Catalans were to make the grand final.
Well, Catalan had made a final before.
Yeah, Challenge
they
Cup final.
played at Wembley. It wasn't empty, was it?
No.
If we can't market the grand final, whoever's in it, I don't know why we bother having this.
No, exactly.
Having the sport, it's 6 months away.
If you're a real rugby league fan, Dave, you want to see a team that has got Dave Taylor, Glenn Stewart, Top Carney, you know, and some cracking French.
Myler's playing
Richie Myler's
really well
been
now
completely rejuvenated. You know, some really good, high-quality French players as well. I think, you know, I would pay good money to watch that team playing wherever they were playing.
Yeah, and Jody Broughton finishing.
And at the moment, you back them to win it, wouldn't you? That's the point, given the way they're going right now.
Yeah, but I mean, a couple of weeks ago, we were talking about 4 weeks ago, we were talking about Warrington, Wigan. You can't see anything past them. So things are changing so quickly this season. That's the problem, isn't it?
It's not the problem; it's the delight.
Yeah,
that's we're going to. If you're a tipster, you don't want to be in rugby league right now, because you look at those matches and you just don't know who's going to turn up and who's going to turn over the hot favourites.
The thing about Catalans, have Catalans had major injuries yet, though? They've had 1 or 2 to key players, but they haven't had a run of them, which Warrington,
well, Todd Carney's not been injured, has he?
Wigan have. If that happens, how are they going to cope with that? That's the big question.
That's the same. That's the same.
Well, I think that's what it's going to come. What it's going to come down to. It's going to be the team that get the key players fit and on the field at the most important time.
Well, it's interesting. Last year, Huddersfield had very few injuries and did very well, and you know, were 1 game away from the grand final. This year they've been racked by injury and they're at the bottom.
We saw Danny Brough back with his game head on, though. This week, didn't we?
Kicking
which you know, I don't know if somebody's put Danny's nose out of joint. Actually, I'm pretty sure they have. but he decided he was going to put on a show this weekend, and we saw a little bit of the old Huddersfield, as indeed we saw the old Leeds.
And what about the old St Helens? What's happened to the old St Helens? Why are St Helens misfiring so badly this season? Well, they're not misfiring badly because they're only a couple of wins away from being very much involved.
Didn't they?
Yeah,
a week or 2 ago.
But they're very inconsistent. I think it's fair to say they're very inconsistent this season.
I think they've really struggled in the 3 quarters. You know, they've got a pack that can live with anybody.
But is that pack actually functioning properly?
It isn't functioning as well as it is. You're not getting as much out of Amor and Walmsley as you were last year. They do look a little bit underpowered at times. James Roby, I thought when they beat Warrington, I thought that he really handed it to Darryl Clark, his rival for the England shirt, you could say. But it isn't the James Roby of old, is it? And I just think that their half-backs are a little bit hit and miss. I do think Luke Walsh struggles in defence. I think they've struggled to know where to put him when they're defending their own line. And
Theo Farge has been showing signs.
He looks like the future for them.
He does, yes. And why Cunningham didn't play him earlier in the season, I'm not quite sure. Was he injured?
No, I think he was just introducing him slowly into the St Helens way. I think that was
but against Warrington, I thought Farge was terrific.
Yeah.
And even against the Catalans, I thought he played quite well in the losing side.
I have to say, when I've seen Saints, even when they've been playing relatively well, I haven't seen a lot of structure.
No.
A lot of kind of creative ideas.
Not much excitement, really.
That you always associated with Saints.
Yeah.
And I think they've overpowered teams at times rather than wow them with Saints-type rugby. And I'm not sure if Kieran Cunningham and Sean Long have quite got them where they want them to be.
The problem for Saints, of course, is that their history, which has been that of playing tremendous, entertaining rugby. And with Saints and winning lots of trophies. Now, that's a fairly lethal combination at a time when you're not playing very well, isn't it? Because the fans don't just want wins at Saints, they want to win with style.
Yeah.
So if they're not winning and they're not playing with style, you know, there's a lot of pressure on Kieran Cunningham.
It's interesting you say that, because you listen to the radio phone-ins, and a lot of Saints fans, you hear them saying, we don't mind if we're not winning, we want to see playing in the St Helens way.
Sure, sure.
And it's a real surprise that with Kieran Cunningham and Sean Long, who are very much a part of the St Helens way, that they're not reproducing that kind of stuff. Or is it just because they lack the personnel to do it?
I don't think it's a lack of will to do it, is it? They just haven't got the players. And the players that they have got aren't particularly playing well. It's the same. You could say the same for a couple of teams at the moment. I don't think it's they're deliberately going out and playing a dull style of rugby. It's just the way it's happening.
Yeah, it's interesting you talk about Roby as well, because you say Roby and his alternative for the England shirt is Clark at the moment. Surely Hodgson's your
Well,
first.
we're looking at Super League, aren't we?
So would Roby actually get in that England squad now? The way he's playing at the moment. I mean, this is a player who's been an absolute shoo-in since he virtually came onto the scene for England. Would he get into the England squad ahead of Hodgson and ahead of Clark, the way Clark
Well, I think you'd be perming two of those three. And on form at the moment, you'd say Hodgson's in and one of the other two.
I think Clark is playing better this year, though.
He had a real disappointing season last year. But, you know, and he's fitted into a Warrington side, let's face it, that with Kirk Gidley in there organising, looks a different side again. And I know they've lost Chris Sandow, but he'll be back eventually. I think Warrington is still, along with Catalans now, if you like, the likely grand finalists.
But one of the characteristics of this season is that we are seeing teams hit the buffers, aren't we? You know, we've seen it with Widnes. Yeah. Widnes were great a few weeks ago. Remember I mean, when Widnes beat Hull 46-6, who would have imagined at that time that Hull would then go on undefeated for 5 games and Widnes would, you know, lose quite a lot of games, and
was that when Hull locked Lee Ratford out of the change?
That's right.
Maybe that's the secret.
That's right.
Get rid of the coaches, boys.
But the point is that Warrington have hit a bit of a buffer at the moment, haven't they? Yeah. You know, being nilled by Huddersfield. You know, it was the nil that hurt really, as much as anything else. So, and you know what we're going to find is that Saints. When you talk about Saints might come good. Yeah, you just don't know the way this season's unfolding.
I can't write off this St Helens.
We might come good as well. Find out in part 2 as to whether we come good or not. See you soon. Welcome back to part 2 of Back Chat, talking about all things rugby league, both here and in Australia. We'll be talking about the NRL in the third part of the programme. But in this second part of the programme, we're very nearly halfway through the regular season here in Super League. So inevitably, the debate begins as to who's going to be the man of steel this year. Halfway through, who's caught your eye, who's really impressed you? Peter Smith, who's your man of steel so far?
I think so far it's difficult to pick one outstanding candidate. Sometimes in a season you get somebody who's head and shoulders above everybody else. I don't think we've got that yet this season. Obviously you have to look at the teams that are going well. I think Chris Sandow, before he got injured at Warrington, he'd be a leading candidate. Kevin Brown at Widnes obviously started very well when they were flying. I think Catalan have got one or two contenders. I like Dave Taylor, the coal train there. He sort of fits every category you want from a man of steel. I think Glenn Stewart's been very well, done very well at Catalan as well. So far, I say it's difficult to point your finger at one player and say he's going to get it this year.
Well, when you think about the Man of Steel, I like to think about it literally, the title, Man of Steel. Yeah. I tend to think that, the Man of Steel should be the guy who's tough, courageous, disciplined, who really brings those sorts of qualities into a team.
Can I make a suggestion here?
Of course.
That we have 2 awards, because it's the debate every year. What is Man of Steel?
Absolutely.
What is Man of Steel? So why don't we have Man of Gold and man of steel. Man of gold is the player you'd want to watch, you'd pay to watch. Your Chris Sandows, your Kevin Browns. Your man of steel is the man who embodies the heart and soul of rugby league. Your Glenn Stewart.
Isn't that everybody that steps over the whitewash onto a rugby field?
Oh,
yeah.
Shucks, of course it is.
But yeah, I mean, I can see the point you make there, Dave. And I mean, we've got the Albert Goldthorpe Medal in our newspaper, which, in a sense, you know, rewards players' skills on a week-by-week basis, which is, you know, quite a different thing, I think, to the Man of Steel. But when it comes to contenders for the Man of Steel, I think Chris Hill's been tremendous this year for Warrington so far.
Yeah.
Glenn Stewart from the Catalan Dragons is another absolutely obvious contender. And at this point, I would say it's between those two, personally.
Well,
I wouldn't go too far beyond them.
Your man of gold would bring in the likes of Corey Thompson, Tom Johnston, Denny Solomona, the players that thrill us but aren't really Man of Steel material.
I'm not convinced, Dave, at all in your argument. I think Man of Steel is fine. It does it. If you sit on the judging panel for Man of Steel, and it isn't chosen until, you know, the week before the grand final traditionally. So you do have the benefit of an overview. And, and you do actually have a definition of what the Man of Steel is. And that is the man who has basically lifted his club to some special achievement. Now, I remember when Danny Brough won it, when Huddersfield finished top of the league that year. There was a real conversation about exactly what it meant among the judging panel.
There is every year.
And I was on it.
There is every year. Every single year.
But
every single year. Including the year that Alan Agar won it, by the way. And he wasn't the player. No. He was a coach.
Yeah. And I think that, you know, we can be pedantic about it like that. But the fact is, it's the outstanding individual who has made the biggest difference to the tournament and to their club. And in that, I think you're looking at, Chris Sandow, if he comes back and continues his form, because he had twice Player of the Month. I think Kirk Gidley has been an absolute critical addition to the Warrington squad. I think he's made a big difference, and I think Glenn Stewart is just a delight to watch at Catalans. And I think when we do have this conversation again in probably about another 8 or 10 weeks, which from no doubt we will, we will have a clearer view, I think, on who is going to be firstly the top 2 or 3 clubs, because I find it very difficult to see a Man of Steel or MVP or Man of Silver, Gold or Aluminium coming from outside that top 2 or 3.
I agree.
I'll throw Top Carney in as well.
I agree with Dave that I think the award should be split. I think we should have a Man of Steel and I think we should have a Player of the Year.
Man of Gold.
That's an absolutely terrible name. So we have a Player of the Year and a Man of Steel. I think the way it's selected as well, you could have the Player of the Year chosen by the players, because their votes go a long way towards deciding the Man of Steel at the moment. And I think it should be a panel that actually decide the Man of Steel. Or if you're not going to have a panel, let's get the coaches to do it. They're the people who watch the most rugby of anyone. They watch every team. They're the people who give an objective view. I'd like to see the coaches.
You have that in the Championship, and some coaches don't bother voting because of the politics of rugby league. You get into all of that nonsense.
I'm not sure the coaches are that objective, if I'm really honest about it, Peter.
Well, you know, I think you'd get a better.
Very much.
Most of them are going to have a losing record.
I think you'd get a more reflective choice than the players.
What about
doing
coaches who get sacked? Do they still have a vote? You're getting into an absolute minefield here with this idea. I mean, it's a good idea and all that, but I agree with Martyn.
It's better than Man of Gold, Dave.
Well, it's not. I agree with Martyn in as much as we should be voting on this on a week-by-week basis, because you presaged this by saying Chris Sandow would be Man of Steel, but he's injured. He's only been out for 2 weeks and already we're forgetting him. And that's the danger of the
problem.
Man of Steel.
The problem that you have with the week-by-week vote, and I think you have this in the Dally M as well as in other ones that we have domestically, is that when you're trusting one person to pick a 1, 2, 3 on a weekly basis, one, the home team is always going to be favoured. 2, teams like North Queensland Cowboys, which are basically a one-horse team with a one-man team with Jonathan Thurston, he gets the 3 points every week. And so you suddenly can have a Man of Steel who isn't the best player in the competition, because it can be on a losing team even. Thurston wasn't. But you can accumulate those points almost by default.
Yeah. There is an argument there, and there's no guaranteed way to pick the best individual player. And let's face it, in one sense, picking an individual player is an anomaly anyway, because it's a team game.
Yeah.
So, you know, who's to say who really contributed most to any team's victory, you know, last weekend? It's always... But there's another point that's probably worth making as well. The last 2 Men of Steel, Darryl Clark won it in 2014. then had a really poor 2015
Because
season.
he moved clubs.
And
there
then,
was
yeah,
reasons for
but
that,
even so, and then, you know, last year Zach Hardaker won it, and he's had a reasonably indifferent season so far, I think, with Leeds.
I think he's kept Leeds alive.
Well,
You see his tackle on.
He's been an outstanding player
Taylor, was
this
it
year.
on against Tully? He won. That won the game. If Leeds had gone 10 points behind, they'd have lost the game.
But you know, I don't think he's shone in the way he did in.
Well, it's tough to be a great fullback when you're playing behind a beaten team.
Yeah.
If you think Man of Steel is a curse, you don't want to be Coach of the Year, do you? How many coaches of the year down the line are still employed? You know, you look down them.
Yeah. Well, Brian McDermott still is, and I don't think that his career was ever, his position at Leeds was ever in doubt. But certainly last week at Headingley helped it somewhat.
Yeah.
But I think it goes to show as well that it's all about what those blokes out on the field do. You know, I'm sure James Webster, if he could have put his boots on for Hull KR against Oldham at half time, he would have done.
Yeah.
You know, out of pure frustration, if nothing else. But the coaches can only go so far, and ultimately it comes down to the leader on the field, the most instrumental man on the team, and that's why we have a Man of Steel.
Yeah.
The other thing, though, Dave, is who's going to be the Young Player of the Year?
Young Player of the Year.
2016.
Well, if it's 21 at the start of the season and younger, I don't know what the criteria is, but let's go on 21 at the start of the season. For me, Ben Curry, absolutely.
Tom Johnston.
Tom Johnston.
Wakefield Trinity
You
Wildcats.
can't give it to wingers; they just catch the ball and put it down over the line.
Tom Johnston is the real deal. He's the best player that's come out of Wakefield, which admittedly isn't saying a huge amount, but he's quality. He's quality. He can catch the ball.
He's not the next Billy Slater, is he?
He can catch. He can catch a ball. He's grease lightning. He's got real pace. He's a terrific finisher. He's somebody to watch. If you haven't seen him, Tom Johnson at Wakefield, outstanding.
What about Max Jarrett?
This year, Max Jarrett.
Well, he's very good as well.
The next in line, the fullback.
Great kid.
The key thing for Wakefield is whether he'll still be a Wakefield player in 2 or 3 years' time.
That's the challenge they will always have.
Wakefield are already saying, well, they're not going anywhere. Let's face it, realistically, they probably will do at some point down the line.
That kid scored a try. Tom Johnson scored a try the other week.
He stood the fullback up.
He turned him inside and outside. You know, the fullback was sat on his backside, Reece Ambry, who is not a back fullback.
No.
And I thought, wow, that was a little bit special. And that is what we want to see lighting up Super League, isn't it? That little bit of X factor.
Yeah.
And I think that kid has it. Ben Curry, a thorough professional, mature beyond his years, Dave, absolutely, in a good Warrington team.
Yeah.
Can do any job the coach asks of him. But for me, as an ex-winger, I love to see what Tom Johnson can bring to
How about an
game.
England wing partnership of Manfredi on one wing and Tom Johnson on the other?
Well, if you're doing it on form,
that looks great, doesn't it?
I mean, there's no way Ryan Hall will get close at the moment, is there? I mean, he's not playing obviously for Leeds at the moment.
Or Tom Briscoe, you know, Charlie's going anyway.
Yeah.
All of a sudden,
Burgess is not getting game time.
He's not getting game time. Greg Eden was a Bolton.
Well, I don't think Greg Eden would be.
No.
Yeah, he's not played a lot at Brisbane, has he?
Not reliably enough.
No.
But who has, apart from the couple that we've mentioned, that have made a real impression?
Yeah. Yeah. Who else? Who else is knocking around? Jermaine McGilvray.
Well, and he was sensational when he got given his head last year.
Yeah. But Manfredi's really challenging him now for that wing spot.
Yeah.
It's good to see young talent coming through. Yeah. You know, challenging the old order, if you like.
But do you think Johnston's, you know, an England international this year potentially? You've seen a bit of it.
Possibly not. Possibly not this year. He's still very, very green, but he's come on an awful lot since last year.
We need to see his defence tested a bit more, don't we?
He's improving every game. It's not easy to shine as a winger for Wakefield Trinity Wildcats, is it? But he's a talent. He gets the ball, and you sit up. You think, well, something's going to happen.
If you're going to blood a young player,
he's got to try against Huddersfield, I think it was, where he ran through the entire defence. Absolutely fantastic.
And you can't quantify that. And if he's good under the high ball, you know, because if a team can look after one player in defence, you know, in some ways it can with the winger, but he's going to get tested at some point. He has to prove himself consistently under the high ball in defence, and if he can do that, he gives you everything on attack that you'd ever want out of a winger.
They've got Jacob Miller cross-kicking to him now, and that's a good weapon. Jacob Miller actually is somebody that's gone well this season.
He's another bolter, isn't he?
As well,
the thing is, when it comes to England, we don't know what matches Wayne Bennett is watching, but you know, we hope that he's watching all of them. So he will have seen Tom Johnston, and you know, I suspect that he will promote him.
You'd like to think he started with a clean sheet of paper, wouldn't you? And that he's going to, you know, be, you know, not just reinvent Steve McNamara's wheel, but come to it with a fresh view And I think that would be the kind of encouraging sign that we really need for the England team.
Sure. So that's your way. Just talking about fullbacks, I mean, Sam Tompkins, we've not seen sight and sound of him so far this season, and hopefully he's going to be back soon. But whether he's going to be back and in England form at the end of the year remains to be seen. Zach Hardacre is, you know, your fullback at the moment. If anything happens to Zach Hardacre, who's your next England fullback? Who would you put as England fullback?
Jamie Shaw, perhaps.
Really?
Well, Jamie Shaw certainly is an attacking fullback. If you're looking for, you know, players to come and join the line, I don't think you can find a better fullback than him.
And I don't think there's a plan B, really.
Yeah.
Personally, I look around the competition and don't see a
well, Dan Sargent has been
enough.
playing in that position, hasn't he, at Wigan?
Yeah, but he's been playing it. He hasn't convinced me. Let's put it like that. Certainly in attack, you know, and for a natural-born centre, I sometimes think he's looked a little bit lost as to where he comes into the line for Wigan. And plus, he's been playing in a Wigan team that's been off its food lately as well.
Yeah.
But I think at the moment it's Hardacre and no argument.
What about Johnny Lomax? He's he played in the reserves this last week for Saints, isn't he? So,
well, again, but we need to see that he's going to get more than 3 or 4 games under his belt before he breaks down again.
Yeah.
Well, let's hope he does. I mean, if anybody deserves a
Absolutely.
bit of good fortune and a run of games, it's Johnny Lomax.
But
Let's hope he can do it.
apart from Jamie Shaw, the other potential contender is Matty Russell at Warrington.
he's Scottish.
Well,
he's Scottish-born.
Depending if he becomes
he's
English.
Scottish, but he's Scottish-born. How much pressure is going to be put on him to actually declare for England? Because he would qualify for England.
Oh, yeah. As would Danny McBrough.
Danny McBrough, yes. And Ben Flower. You had Ben Flower play for England last year, isn't it?
And I actually found out that he did qualify.
Did he?
Yeah.
Do we put pressure on him? Is there any pressure?
Well, who knows? I mean, only he could answer that, whether he'd respond to that or not.
Yeah.
You know,
well, we'll have to ask him.
To
We'll ask him before the next programme. And just on Player of the Year, Young Player of the Year, we've done those. And just going back to the Wakefield theme and using your idea of if they've not played for 2 weeks, we forget all about them. So if they've had success for the last 4 weeks, they must be the stars of the future. Chris Chester is making a case for being Coach of the Year at the moment, isn't he?
I'm tipping him as the next OKR.
They could do worse. They could do worse.
Yeah, well, he's
I say that tongue in cheek.
It is remarkable to see the difference with him coming in. He's obviously changed a few things structurally, but I think to a large extent he's just got them playing with a bit more confidence and a bit more freedom. And he said, go out and enjoy it. I think there was a bit of tension under Brian Smith where the players were a little bit afraid to make mistakes. And Chester said, just go out and play, and he's encouraging people like Miller and Finn, who's going really well at the moment, and Johnson, people like that to play.
I think Smith gave Miller quite a lot of confidence as well, though, didn't he?
He did.
You know,
Johnson's come out this week and said about Brian Smith, he'd done a lot for his game as well.
He put a lot of building blocks in place that Chris Chester's benefiting from. But I will go back to the Oldham example here, Dave, actually. It's about what's under there.
Yeah.
And if you've got a tight bunch of lads that can all play a bit, they wouldn't be where they are if they couldn't play some rugby. But you get the real spirit and camaraderie and desire among those lads, and some leadership on the field, which, you know, people like Danny Kermond will always bring to a club. Then there's nothing you can't achieve, and I think that's what we're seeing this season. That's what Chris Chester's benefiting from. What Hull KR are missing, and what teams like Oldham, when they've got it in spades, will always have the ability to do.
The thing about Chester is he's just allowed the Wakefield players to relax a bit at the right time, because Brian Smith is a great coach, but a very demanding one, and you know it's difficult to play for him in a sense, because he's always challenging you, and it's quite exhausting. I mean, he even had Wakefield training, I'm told, at 6 o'clock every morning, and you know Chester's relaxed that a bit, you know, and I think they're just feeling, you know, they've just stepped back a bit and they're just enjoying playing and enjoying each other's company. And I think that counts for a lot, as you say.
How far can they go? How far can they go? Can they make the top 8?
There's no doubt about it. The way they're playing at the moment, I don't think. What would you think, Peter? You've seen them a lot.
I think they can. I mean, they're playing a good style against. Yeah. It's hard to judge against Wigan because Wigan had 10 players out, but they scored some fantastic tries. They played a really exciting brand of rugby. And the defence, in the last, I think Wigan had 3 or 4 penalties on Wakefield's line in the last couple of minutes. That's 62-0. And Wakefield weren't going to concede.
They can all tackle.
I think they will. I think they will have a dip though.
It's the desire. And again, we'll come back to injuries, won't we? Yeah. Because they've got to keep they've got to keep Jacob Miller, for instance.
Everybody's fit at the moment. They're full of confidence. They're playing well. They will have a dip. I suspect they might just miss out. But they're in a much better state than they were this time last year.
And again, it depends how much now Leeds and Huddersfield build momentum. Yeah. Because if they're coming at you from behind, there might be real pressure on that top 8, Dave. Yeah. Somebody has got to finish 9, 10, 11, 12. Yeah.
That's right, and if Wakefield do finish in the top 8, who's going to fill those 4 slots?
That's right.
Well, at the moment you have Hull KR is nailed on in the bottom 4.
Yep.
Not necessarily bottom, but nailed on as in the bottom 4. Yep. And it's very hard to not have an argument about who the next 3 are going to be.
Which we wouldn't have been saying last year, would we?
Yeah. Well, there's something coming up next Monday that might have a bit of an influence on that, isn't there? The Salford Tribunal hearing, where they've been accused of infringing the salary cap. So we don't know yet what the outcome of that is going to be.
You know what that is? You know what that is? Yeah. It's a cliffhanger. And we love to go into the adverts on cliffhangers. We'll be back in just a few moments' time. Welcome back to the third, and you'll be relieved to know, final part of this week's Back Chat, joined today, of course, by Danny Lockwood, Martyn Sadler and Peter Smith. This is the part where we talk about the NRL. One of the stories from the NRL this week is, in fact, more of a Super League story. The idea that Blake Solly, the general manager of Super League, is leaving to go back to become chief executive of South Sydney. Martyn Sadler, has that shocked you, disappointed you, surprised you?
Well, a couple of months ago, David, it would have shocked me because, I thought Blake was very well set in Super League. I speak to Blake quite a lot, as I'm sure a lot of us do. And, he was very happy in his job. He was doing a very good job as far as I'm concerned. And, he was looking ahead to the future, planning for the next 3 or 4 years of Super League. And I've often spoken to him about going back to Australia and, does he have ambitions to do that? And he'd say, well, not in the short term. He's got his feet under the table in Salford, in Media City, and that's where he wanted to stay. So then to suddenly find that he is going back to become the chief executive of South Sydney, was quite surprising, really. Although I suspected something was amiss because I had heard stories that Nigel Wood, the chief executive of the RFL, was not absolutely happy with the way that Super League was developing under Blake. I think the essence of the problem is that Blake has tended to interpret the job there as representing the Super League clubs to the RFL, and Nigel's view is that he ought to represent the views of the RFL to the Super League clubs. And that may sound a bit pedantic, and but nonetheless it can have quite a big impact and in the way it operates, and particularly with Super League being run separately from Salford, away from Red Hall in Leeds, there is the potential for conflict there, as anybody can see.
It's felt like 2 empires. The last few months, last year or so, it's felt like 2 empires.
Yes. I think there's been a real schism between the seats of power. And I think that, from my perspective, I would say that Blake has quite clearly been empire building. I think a lot of good people within the organisation have paid the price of Salford being built up as a citadel in opposition to, and not an adjunct of, Red Hall. I think that the job itself was an incredibly difficult one for Blake to do because you're dealing with some very interesting personalities as chairman of the Super League clubs. Sure. So I don't know if he was allowed to get done a lot of the things that he might have wanted to do. I don't know if that was a frustration. I don't see that the Super League as a commercial product has made much ground at all under Blake. And I don't know if that is reflective of all of the things that have gone into the mix, Dave. And so, to me, it would be interesting to think, as he jumped, was he pushed? Because I certainly don't see that job, which is effectively number 3 at South Sydney, I know it's got the CEO title, but you know, you've got Shane Richardson in there who's the head of all
some
football
massive
operations.
egos at South Sydney.
You've got Nick Pappas, the chairman, who is very hands-on.
Yes.
And of course you've got Russell Crowe coming over the top whenever he's not happy with things.
And Jamie Packer is a major shareholder.
And of course at the same time you've got South Sydney, a team that at the moment are very much disappointing. So I think that Blake has taken a decision that might have a heck of a lot of ingredients in the mix of it. And I think the interesting thing now will be to see how quickly and who and the type of person the RFL appoint in Blake.
I think Blake is jumping into Dante's Inferno at South Sydney. I mean, it's a highly politicised club. There are so many massive egos there. You know, Michael Maguire, the coach, is a pretty unique individual, totally single-minded. Won't take any notice of what the chief executive says to him, and you know, then on the playing side you've got Sam Burgess and all the other
Greg Inglis,
players,
all the big names,
you know, some massive people to deal with.
But of course Blake isn't a rugby man either. You know, he's not traditionally a rugby league man. He's a solicitor who's cut his teeth in rugby league administration. I'd like to think, and I like Blake Solly, I'd like to think that this may be a stepping stone to him getting into the NRL hierarchy, which I think would be where he'd be more comfortable.
I don't know as much about RFL politics as you two do, but is the sport worse off with Blake going?
I think the danger is
it going to make any practical difference?
The danger is now is that you speak to certain club representatives, chairman, owners, chief executives, and they will name check Blake Solly as doing a good job. So I think the clubs saw him as being a very good representative of them in their battle against the RFL. So I think that it's going to be a very, very tricky appointment, that, because whoever gets appointed is going to have to play the diplomat to keep those clubs on side, but also to make sure that that's right with the RFL.
The interesting thing will be who appoints
I don't think there's any doubt about who that will be.
You think it'll be Nigel?
It'll be
Well,
Nigel.
I think that might happen, but I think there's a danger of, if it's an RFL appointee that the clubs are not happy with, that might be the trigger for the clubs to say.
They would have to sanction it.
Yeah, but the clubs might trigger the clubs to say, right, we're going to have our own marketing department, we're going to have our own chief executive, because that has been
they effectively have.
You see, the clubs moved to get their own non-executive director of Super League, and you know they're actually searching for a new one at the moment, of course, because Richard Bowker, who was a non-exec, he resigned a few weeks ago. So there are some strange things happening behind the scenes, and certainly I've spoken to quite a lot of club chairmen, and without, you know, they've all said that they are sorry that Blake is leaving. You know, that none of them wanted to lose Blake.
He was put in. Let's just go back a little while, 2 years to when he was given the job. You know, it was on the back of the Super League chairman's rebellion led by Ian Lenigan.
Sure.
You know, it was assuaged by Nigel walking in with a big TV deal and a lot of money that quietened a lot of clubs for a while at least. And he put in place Blake, who is a very diplomatic, personable man who could champion the Super League clubs and did a great job of that. So I'm not surprised they're all happy with him.
The interesting thing, when that job was created, though, it was called the general manager, not the chief executive.
That's right.
I'm sure that came from Nigel. Nigel didn't want another chief executive in place.
But we've had a Super League breakaway before, when Chris Casely was involved at Bradford, and Maurice Lindsay, etc. Could we see a Super League breakaway again, where they virtually run their own? No?
No, because the Sky TV deal is done with the RFL, isn't it? If the Super League clubs broke away,
but without the Super League clubs, there'd be no Sky TV deal, would there?
Yeah, but without the RFL, there wouldn't
The problem,
either.
from my point of view, where Blake Solly has failed for me, or hasn't been the success that some people would count him as, is that I'm of the camp that says we should have a holistic approach to running rugby league as a sport.
Yes, I think that too.
And Ian Lenigan and Marlon Kukash, perhaps, and one or two other people want that. They want the Premier League style and FA separation between the sports. I think that would be a disaster.
I think that,
and
the fact is that's what Nigel Wood thinks as well. You know, I think there's no doubt about it.
Why would that be a disaster? Just to play devil's advocate here, why would that be a disaster?
They would take all of the money. They would divvy it up. They can't even run their own reserve competition, Dave.
No.
The sport below Super League at the minute in the full-time professional sphere is in complete disarray.
Yeah, but you see, the clubs would argue that it's the RFL that are poisoning that chalice in terms of running the the reserve teams.
We're trying to run a sport that produces young athletes that can progress through to academy rugby and become Super League and England stars of the future. Now that starts at your under-8s down at Dewsbury Celtic and goes all the way to whatever Wayne Bennett has to choose from. If you don't have that, if you sever that head and say, well, you lot just take care of providing us athletes, but you're not getting any money, any help, and we're going to completely disregard you because we want money, because we're greedy, then I think that we stand to really create serious problems for the sport.
When football did it with the Premier League, that was in harness with the FA. Why can the RFL not play that same role of saying, yeah, we understand your need for autonomy, but let's do it with a certain amount of togetherness here.
But that's what we were doing.
Sport.
Yeah, that's right. And the fact is, in football, the Premier League doesn't swallow all the TV money, does it?
No, but it could have done. It could have done had the FA not taken on that role too. So why can the RFL not take on that?
We're not as big as football.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah. The difficulty with rugby league is not so much the organisational structure within the sport, I don't think, but it's our inability to market the game and to generate more commercial income for the game, isn't it? And in a sense, Danny's already pointed out that Super League hasn't been that successful in doing that. And I think that's, we need somebody in place who can really widen the public interest in rugby league, because if we don't do that, the income either for the Super League clubs or any other clubs or even the amateur game is not going to grow.
I've not seen any blue chip sponsorship. We always tag a couple of people on. Dacia came on, for the World Cup Challenge, things like that.
They seem to come and go, don't they?
And we get these little these bachelors mushy peas, lovely, with your fish and chips perhaps. But what I'm saying is, if Blake Solly's remit was to improve the commercial performance of Super League, and I understand it was, you can't say that we've actually seen that, Dave. Attendances are going in the wrong direction. I'm not sure that the mainstream viewing figures are improving at all. So we have to see progress, otherwise we're going backwards. And I think that whatever the frustrations and the backstories were, there certainly were some. And Blake, whether he jumped or was pushed or just saw the writing on the wall, he's decided in a change of direction. We have to hope now that his replacement can take on the good job that he was doing and move it forward.
Sure.
And look beyond our own boundaries. There is such a theme in rugby league at the moment at club level and at RFL level that seems to think that we operate within our own boundaries in terms of our media. With websites, club websites are more important than the outside media, which is utterly ridiculous unless the sport wants to kill it.
That's a big thing. I think that, speaking of someone who writes about the sport every minute of every day, that's a big thing now. We're finding that clubs less and less are sending information out. More and more, it's just coming on their website. And the RFL. I can't remember the last time I had a press release from the RFL. And a lot of the time is clubs will deliberately not give you information because they're scared of it coming out in the papers or on the Yorkshire Evening Post website, for example, rather rather than it appearing on their own website. Clubs are paranoid. That journalists are going to break stories before they do, even if it's little things like injury news, and that's bad for the sport. We've got to spread the word, not contain it.
What clubs don't seem to realise is that if they only ever break stories on their own websites, and you can understand why they might want to do it, they're only ever talking to a very limited pool of people.
And
the people who already support them. They'll never expand their supporter base.
But I don't know what Martyn's view on it is, but that to me was actually central to Blake Solly's remit and theme, in that we saw the centre become more protectionist, Martyn, this last 2 years. We as the trade press have had our noses pushed out of joint for sure. So, and I do think that there has to be an expansionist view on the world. We're going to see the launch of a Toronto franchise next week, Dave. So there are things happening that are encouraging. Toulouse are a good news story. But if we're not selling that, and if the centre is not convinced of how it's going to sell it, then guys like us are whistling in the wind, to be quite frank.
The fact is, Danny, that you and I as proprietors of the 2 weekly newspapers in Rugby League, get no help whatsoever,
None whatsoever,
from the RFL or from Super League. And I think, you know, it's the one area where we can be totally united, I think.
It's just quite touching, actually, seeing you to be so friendly. It's wonderful.
Oh, we have a common interest, and that's Rugby League.
Yeah.
And sometimes I'm actually afraid that our common interest isn't shared by the people who benefit most from it.
I think covering from a media point of view, I think covering the sport has got a lot harder. I've been at the Evening Post for 20 years now this year, since the start of Super League, and it's a lot harder covering clubs and covering the sport than it was even 5 years ago. It's getting harder, and I think that's something the Rugby League need to look at. If we're going to expand the interest in the sport, we need more media coverage.
That's what the next Blake Sol is going to have to take.
I'll bring a name up here, and God bless his soul, but Peter Deakin. You know, what a role it would have been for Peter Deakin. Because he had that vision, and we've lacked that vision since, of realising there's a big world out there that doesn't understand Rugby League, doesn't know Rugby League, isn't interested in Rugby League, and the only way for the sport to grow is for us to make an impression on those people.
There's been no one. There has been no one since Peter.
No, sadly.
Not Sadler. Oh, sadly. Well, I think Martyn's the next man for the job.
Okay. Quick round up before we do the fixtures.
I think we could share it, Danny.
Quick round up of the NRL news that's been going on this week. Brisbane, North Queensland. You know, I think they squeezed the results out, didn't they, the Cowboys? But they just keep rolling on at the moment.
Looks like another all-Queensland grand final at the moment, doesn't it? Brisbane, North Queensland, the best 2 teams in the competition by a long way.
They're the 2 bolters out. The Melbourne came unstuck, which was I thought that we were seeing a return to the old great days of Cameron Smith and Cooper Cronk. But anybody can beat anyone apart from the Roosters. The Roosters, they got over the top of their big city rivals, South Sydney, who are in a slump of their own right now. But apart from that, it does look very
but they've got, I think they've got Worry, Hargraves, Boy Cordner, and of course Mitchell Pearce to come back in the next few
But of course, Cronulla Sharks are in 3rd place now, Dave, and they've never won a premiership. I think it was Jack Gibson who made the infamous comment for Australians that waiting for Cronulla to win a premiership is like waiting for, having the porch light on for Harold Holt to come back. And those people who don't remember, Harold Holt was the Australian Prime Minister who went swimming one day and never came back.
Fantastic.
It'd be great for Paul Gallen.
It would.
Right, we're running out of time, so quickly let's just tell you what's happening this week as far as the fixtures are concerned on this very channel, Premier Sport TV. You can check them out on the website, by the way, www.premiersports, don't forget the s.tv. So these are the games. Friday, just the one game, Broncos against the Rabbitohs at Suncorp. Can the Rabbitohs turn things around, or do the Broncos roll on inexorably? Saturday, 3 games, Bulldogs against the Titans, Raiders against the Tigers, and Cowboys against the Eels. There's one game on Sunday, which is the Sharks against the Panthers. And then on Monday, 3 matches on Monday, starting at 5 a.m. in the morning. The Knights against the Eagles, followed by the Dragons against the Roosters, and finishing with Melbourne Storm against the Warriors at Amy Park. So that's your viewing this week as far as the NRL is concerned. This is your panel for this week from Back Chat programme. A very big thank you to, I've forgotten your name. Danny Lockwood. Sorry, I was going to call you something completely different. It wouldn't have been rude. Danny Lockwood. Next to him is Michael somebody or other, Martyn Sadler from League Express, and Peter Smith from the Yorkshire Evening Post. Thank goodness you've got a simple name. That's it. As far as we go, I'm off to buy somebody, Danny Lockwood, a drink to apologise. I'll see you next time. Goodbye.